Good Wednesday morning to you. Yesterday in the devotion, I talked a little bit about consolation because a word had been stuck in my mind. God is our hope and consolation. And we looked at 2 Corinthians, and in that short passage, notice the redundancy of Paul, using the same word over and over again to hit home the importance of what it means to be consoled by God and for God to be our ultimate consolation in faith and life. Today, I'm going to do the same thing. I want to talk about the redundancy of Paul and turn to the word hope. You know, sometimes Paul, as he's writing these letters to these churches, as he's writing to these communities of new believers, sometimes he uses the same word over and over again to help hit home the point of what they are facing and how God is at work in that. In the book of Romans, this happens again, especially as we get to that beloved 8th chapter of Romans. It's one of the most quoted chapters, I think, in all of the epistles. And as we get halfway through the chapter, Paul's speaking into future glory. He's acknowledging the sufferings of the present time in perspective to the hope that faith provides. And hope is the redundant word. So if you look at Romans chapter 8, and if you just look at verse 24, notice this. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Again, you know, that word hope used over and over again to hit home the point of what the vastness of God is all about. In this chapter, Paul is speaking through, God is speaking through Paul to really redefine what it means a life of faith, a life that is full of God's Spirit, a life that looks differently at the world around us, even each other. It helps us to see one another through a different lens. It makes us maybe less callous or jaded toward one another. It helps us to show more compassion and love for each other. Paul likens all of that to our retention of hope. We cling to hope, not because of what we see. We don't cling to hope because everything is perfect around us, or the people around us are just doing everything that makes us happy and makes everything easy in life. No, Paul says we cling to not which we see, but that which we don't see. We cling to the work of the Holy Spirit. We cling to the almighty power of God to be moving and changing the world even beyond our immediate understanding. That's what hope is all about. And in this 8th chapter of Romans, Paul is reminding us that hope is really central to our faith. We can't say that we believe and we live a faithful life without clinging to hope. That means clinging to something we anticipate, clinging to something we might only be able to imagine, clinging to something that is sometimes beyond our reason and ability to really understand. That's a pretty big invitation in our faith. It's something that takes us out of ourselves and puts us on a path that we might not choose or we might not even realize exists. Paul goes on to say in verse 26, likewise the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought, but the very Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words. And God, who searches the heart, knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Really, that's the culmination of hope, is that when we don't have any other words, when we have no idea how to put into words what God is doing, what God has done, what God has put on our imagination to do, we cling. We cling to hope. We cling to the Spirit at work. We cling to the very power of God in our lives. So I wonder, we're halfway through the week. Do you find yourself speaking the same word over and over again? Because sometimes I think it's indicative of where our mind is. When we speak a word of positive over and over again, we tend to be in a good mood or feeling very satisfied, even abundant, the abundance of life. When we find ourselves speaking a negative word over and over again, sometimes it's because fundamentally we're just unhappy. We're miserable. And maybe that's the very invitation for us to dig deep and to find out, where is God in the midst of all of that. I think Paul does a really good job of showing where his heart and his mind and his faith are grounded, as he uses the same word in various passages to hit home the point. Yesterday it was consolation. Today it is hope. We'll figure out something different for Friday. But whatever the word is you find yourself clinging to today, let it speak to you. Let it speak to you. Let it change you. Let it wash over you and affect you in a way that you may not have imagined. I hope you have a great Wednesday.